Hi, I'm Esther.
And I'm Sean.
I write about AI news here at TechTarget in Massachusetts.
And I edit Esther's stories.
We're here to talk with tech experts about everything AI and ChatGPT.
Don't forget Google Gemini.
Whether it's who's ahead in the generative AI race, the metaverse, digital twins, or even the latest in autonomous vehicles, we've got it covered. Right, Sean?
Yep, we've got it covered.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Targeting AI episode. Today, we are speaking to Danielle Faggella, founder and head of research at Emerj Artificial Intelligence Research. She's also the host of the Trajectory podcast, which focuses on AI and the effects of AI technology on humanity. Thank you for joining us, Dan.
Yeah, glad to be here, guys. Glad to be here.
All right, Dan. So Esther gave me the first question. So to kick off, what is Emerj AI research all about? What kind of companies do you follow and track? What trends are you seeing so far? And who's getting good ROI with Gen AI and who's not?
There's a book on each of those. So high level, I'll give you the background of Emerj. So Emerj is a publisher and market research firm at the intersection of sort of the ROI of AI. So we look at the P&L impact of AI in major sectors like life sciences, defense, financial services, etc. So think about the Fortune 500. So we have a show called the AI in Business podcast with, the trajectory is kind of the side thing about AGI, but the AI in Business podcast is 1.5 million downloads a year. And everybody from the CIO of Goldman Sachs, head of AI Raytheon, chief technology officer Takeda Pharmaceutical, the sort of Fortune 500 buyer crowd is one half of the people we talk to. The other half of the people we talk to are the big sellers. So you could think about a Palantir, you could think about a Data Robot, you could think about an AWS or a Google Cloud. So we're talking to the big buyers and the big sellers that are sort of pushing AI into an enterprise reality and kind of getting a pulse of where things are going. And again, the AI in Business podcast is the main show that we use as kind of a conduit for that. So that's what we track, mostly the big industries. So I'm going to give you 6 of them: banking, insurance, healthcare, life science, retail, manufacturing. That's mostly it, but we also cover defense, automotive, some other spaces. But the big 6 are sort of a big part of our rolling editorial calendars. So we track the Fortune 500 in those areas. In terms of sort of who's getting ROI from Gen AI, it's a very different story than who's getting ROI from AI broadly. So Gen AI is so remarkably new and nascent, it is actually hard for me to put it into words. So I happen to be a believer that it is underhyped, not overhyped. I think it is monumentally capable. The enterprise takes a very long time to change their workflows and processes. So it isn't about, is this tool better than sort of the way that we do things? It's, will the call center employees actually use it? How are we going to integrate it with these legacy systems built in 1972? The change management side has always been a bigger challenge than the data science side when it comes to enterprise AI. And Gen AI is so early in the enterprise. We've seen some people in marketing using it to write email subject lines in a little dark corner. Some people in a dark corner of insurance using it to summarize things because I hate reading these big goofy documents. But we don't see a broad integrated embrace of Gen AI in legacy enterprise at all. I think we're another 18 months away from finding the pockets of wins. AI generally, I think we've got some pockets. Gen AI, too early to tell.
What about RPA? Like, how is Gen AI? A lot of big enterprises are using RPA. Like, how much of a leap is it to go to Gen AI as we know it from RPA?
Yeah, I mean, these are just completely different wheelhouses. So, we've had the heads of AI at the UiPaths and the Pegas and that whole ecosystem and followed them for the last 6 years. It's really been the last 4 or 5 that they've started talking about their AI stuff. And I'm sure that they're flashing Gen AI on their website now because everybody who's doing enterprise AI has been forced to do a rebrand, whether it's truthful or not, or right or not. Everybody's got to resonate with the buzzword that everybody cares about right now. Gen AI and RPA are very different things. So RPA might be something as monotonous and boring, but incredibly useful. So by the way, I'm not downplaying RPA. Wonderful set of technologies. And there's a bunch of great players there, really smart players. But RPA might be something like, when this file gets dragged into here, if it has these properties, do this, duplicate it, store it in this place, and then do this and set these security settings under these parameters. It's a string of kind of if-thens. And it can be more extrapolated into kind of more fulfilling a workflow rather than just a cold set of if-thens. But for the most part, we're talking about automating a set of if-then processes. You really don't need AI at all for a lot of that. I would say 90% of RPA, you just don't need AI in the mix for it to be called RPA by any means. Gen AI is an entirely different ballgame. So will Gen AI fit into RPA? Sure, in some places. In many places, it won't. There's plenty of workflows, guys. where you just need to take the file, put the right security settings on it, load it somewhere here, retitle it this way, redact this information and store it somewhere. No Gen AI needed. Would be ridiculous to use it. So Gen AI will work its way into RPA by augmenting different workflows. Maybe Gen AI will be integrated where we store some big fancy contract, and Gen AI will strip out, let's say, the clawback clauses or the any refund clauses, and we'll summarize them and have them in some short bullets under each contract, so the people that are reviewing their folks can just sort of analyze things at a lighter level. There might be something like that, but most RPA doesn't require Gen AI. I think the merger and the mesh of them will come together over time, but they're very different things.
I really found it interesting how you're talking in the beginning about call centers as well as like the uses of Gen AI for some companies versus like I guess bigger enterprises. And so I wonder, why do you think it's the 18-month mark? Why do you think there's so much slow adoption within the bigger enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to be said about this. I mean, it's been wild the last 10 years watching AI gradually trickle its way into the enterprise. I mean, we've got enough traction there. AI has not been a bubble of nothing. There's plenty of wonderful, splendid applications in telco and banking and retail and you name it. But jeepers, it has been a slow grind. So 7 years ago, all the companies busting into banking and retail and whatever all thought, hey, we're going to overhaul these workflows. Let's reinvent the call center. Let's reinvent insurance underwriting. And what they learned is that enterprises don't want to reinvent anything. They want a minimal workflow change with an extremely short-term ROI horizon to measure if something is good or worthwhile or not. And a lot of the vendors weren't really mature enough to, in all honesty, do that transformation anyway. They had an abstract vision. They didn't really know the boots on the ground problems in the call center, in the fraud department, whatever the case may be. So it's been extremely gradual. I don't think we're going to see the waves of Gen AI splashing down in the enterprise where we're really seeing people getting sloughed out of jobs. We're really seeing wild transformation departments until two things happen. So here's the two things. One, the startup ecosystem starts eating their lunch. So eating their lunch means taking and serving their customers, right? So doing a better job than they are at whatever problem they solve. I don't care if it's, auto insurance quoting. I don't care if it's, selling jewelry. It doesn't matter what it is. When the startups start eating your lunch because they're massively more efficient and hyper-personalized, that's one pressure that's going to force the enterprise to actually adopt in a non-piecemeal, non-baby steps way. The second step is sort of the more nimble first movers. So there might be some mid-market folks, or there might be some particularly digitally savvy folks, within retail banking, within ag tech, whatever spaces we want to talk about, who start adopting this stuff so fervently that it's clearly creating wins. The markets get excited, the customers get excited, their competitors start getting asked, well, do you do this cool thing that this other company does? And only when the peer pressure and the bottom-up pressure forces them to change will most legacy enterprises change. So that's what change looks like in the enterprise.
Shifting over to like, obviously you have so much deep knowledge when it comes to AI and so much research in AI, Dan. What would you say is it about the shift in the way bad actors have used AI before the popularity of Gen AI and now after Gen AI exploded?
In terms of bad actors using it, I don't think we've really seen the big bubble of that actually hit. So we're not at a place now where sort of every old lady named Myrtle is getting a phone call from a simulated voice of their grandchild asking them to wire money or whatever. We're not there right now. There is a lot of dark web activity about this kind of tech. So sort of if you look at the people that go into the dark web and figure out what the quote unquote bad guys are talking about, there's a lot of excitement there around generating text and social engineering and things along those lines. But even the last election, guys, we didn't see it dominated by deepfakes as like the predominant, ethical concern, right? That wasn't exactly what happened. I don't think that fight has even begun. I think there are elements of it we should be concerned about in the relative near term, especially with the huge developments in vision and voice that have been just the last 6 months. But has it flared up? Has it become this global hoopla? Not in the enterprise. No. Not in the intergovernmental world. No. We're not at a place yet where there's a pandemic of adversarial Gen AI usage just yet. I think we might get there. We're not there.
Okay, to segue back into deepfakes.
Sure.
You have experience in how AI technology has been used for fraud, market manipulation, high-tech crime. So what's the potential for Gen AI in these areas like To me, it's like anything else. It's just scale. It's like they can make making deepfakes a lot easier and more people can do them. And they will play a role in the election. They already kind of had. But what is coming down the line in that with Gen AI?
Scale could be seen as one part of it. I had hypothesized 5 years ago that, by about this time, sort of any undergrad with a reasonable computer science background could probably take, 5 minutes of somebody and create something pretty well replicating them. And we're more or less there. I think there's a couple things to talk about here. One is this sort of risk of bad actors, as you're articulating. So people, oh, Joe Biden said this terrible thing. Look at this video clip that goes viral on social. Because, of course, we can't validate these things, at least right now, right? At some point, we're going to have to swallow the horse pill called, unless there's wild cryptographic or physical evidence, we have to assume it could be fake. We're 18 months, 12 months from like that being the ubiquitous experience of the internet. And that's going to be a very big change for people, for society. There's going to be governance concerns. I will expect we'll have, oh, Trump said this bad thing, Biden said this bad thing, Biden did this bad thing, check out this video clip. And of course, the people that want to believe that are going to share it, no matter what side of the political fence you're on. You'll share and you'll like the stuff that hates on your enemies because we're a delightfully primal monkey species. But I think we're also going to see other things. So the other things would be potentially this technology being used overtly and directly. So one could imagine a political campaign where instead of leaving the same voicemail on everybody's phone, this pundit might be able to use Gen AI on their voice and might be able to hyper tailor and customize the specific message based on the demographics. Do they own a gun? Whatever the criteria are, right? What's the valuation of their house? How many kids? Other things. They could use a number of things that would help them target a political message and by their own volition, conjure generated permutations of their own voice or likeness to be able to resonate more deeply with individual constituents. But even that political side, so okay, it's going to be in politics. It's not just going to be bad. It's also going to be used overtly and directly. The bigger shift here is that this is just in general where we're going. We're entering a world where more and more every 3 months, we will be able to tell that more of what we're experiencing is generated entirely by AI. So here's the analogy. I just want to see if this sticks, guys. I'll end on this, but I think this is important. If you look at your screen time per day over the last 10 years, probably it's stayed pretty high. You are already working from a computer, probably both of you. I don't know your background, but my guess is, maybe you were hanging at 10, 12 hours. Maybe it's gone up to 14 because you play some games on your phone or smartphones have gotten better and whatever. That's kind of hung pretty high. You go back 80 years, that would have been a weird, monstrous life, by the way. If your great-grandparents were like, your great-grandchild's going to look at glass for most of their waking hours, including weekends, they would say that that is hell, but we're living it, and it's not hell. Make note, it's very monstrous, right? It's very monstrous and different from the past. Now, what is the percent of that screen time, right? You're pretty much maxed out on screen time. What's the percent of that screen time where the content you're engaging with has been conjured to you by an algorithm? YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, doesn't matter what it is, Netflix. What's the percentage of the things behind glass brought forth to your eyes based on artificial intelligence entirely? And that number has grown exponentially in the last decade. Soon, that number will be things that are conjured to you entirely from AI. The funny video clip you watch will be perfectly calibrated based on what you think is funny, and it's never been shown to anybody else. The song you're listening to relax as you wind down your evening after a stressful day of work will be calibrated by everything that's ever relaxed you and by potentially real-time biofeedback. So we're moving into a world of programmatically generated experience as sort of the default. And I think that's a dynamic that probably, if more people thought about it, would be more disturbing than kind of a fake video of Joe Biden saying something bad.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely an interesting analogy. I wondered, because you're like, well, we're not really there yet at the point where it's so bad. Obviously, you know that in March, President Joe Biden warned about AI voice impersonations. And then there's kind of some move toward AI regulation. And then we had obviously Hillary Clinton speaking about deepfakes earlier, how it could affect this election. And then we still, like you said, the technology is increasingly growing rapidly. Like OpenAI introduced their voice engine. 11 Labs is also doing some stuff with voice. So is there a way to control the technology while still making improvements and advancement? What can the government do and what can technology vendors do to prevent the misuse and mishandling?
Yeah, I think it's great that there is an active kind of innovator and regulator open discourse about where this heads. There's some pretty rough polarities on both sides. Overregulation, before we know what this stuff could do, I think could have downsides. I think totally letting it run amok and letting everybody's intellectual property turn into somebody else's product at scale, probably also bad. Probably like food, there's a right amount of FDA, right? Let's not let them put glue in the milk to be able to fluff the amount of milk that's in there, like they do back before there were laws around this stuff. So there's going to be a balance. I suspect this is a living, breathing conversation, and we're going to have to figure out where to draw the line around the use of someone's IP. So let's say I create an album or I create some artwork, or the use of someone's likeness. So if I'm Mariah Carey or I'm you, I probably don't want people singing in my voice, using my exact likeness, etc. So I think when used in the public sphere, I think there's going to have to be some clawbacks, regulatory consequences of people using those things. Already impersonation is against the law. We need to figure out where to draw that line with AI. I also think we need to accept the fact that we are very close, if not already there, to a world where kind of anyone can use your kind of likeness in kind of any way they want, and probably you won't know about it. So Mariah Carey may be able to keep people from creating songs that are too Mariah Carey-like that get streamed on Spotify for revenue. She may be able to prevent that, but she's not going to be able to prevent people from using her physical likeness in virtual reality in a hot tub with somebody that thinks Mariah Carey is attractive. I think there's going to be a lot of weird uses of likenesses and weird virtual experiences that if they exist on someone else's own hardware somewhere and it's not public to the world, we're going to kind of accept anybody can fiddle faddle with that data. It's going to be really hard to put, to put the genie back in the lamp here. So I think publicly we need to worry about likenesses and IP. I think societally we need to sort of ask what it means if anybody with a picture and a short video of someone can do all kinds of wacky stuff with their likeness. I suspect that we're pretty close to that world already.
So just in terms of like the idea of likeness, right? Do you think that it is the responsibility of the tech vendors to kind of limit that use of being able for someone to use the likeness?
I guess
because you have like for example, when we're talking about OpenAI, like one of the reasons they're like, oh, we're only putting our voice engine in preview is because we don't want the misuse of this technology, right? And so they're saying we're limiting it in order to provide the responsible use. And you're talking about IP and data, and that's a conversation that's being thrown around a lot of like who owns what, right? And how do we kind of prevent the misuse? So what do you think about that?
I think the only mature and adult perspective of observing the world is to expect self-interest to be the rule for any organism or organization. It is impossible to read books, to have life experience, to read history, and to have any other opinion. So OpenAI should only be expected to do, not because they're bad, by the way. So you could interpret this as, Dan thinks OpenAI is bad. I don't. What you could expect OpenAI to do would be to send the right moral signals to create whatever visage, whatever perception management will behoove them, but also drive forward towards whatever is most profitable. We saw the CTO of OpenAI be interviewed about whether YouTube videos are being used to train their algorithm. And, there was a little bit of an interesting flinch in that interview. And again, I don't think she's a bad person. I think OpenAI should be expected within the bounds of law, more or less. Thank God laws exist for all of us, to do precisely what's in their self-interest. So should we expect tech to get this job done? I don't think so. Is that because they're bad? No, it's because they're as self-interested as everybody else. If one of you here had a business that was all about generating music, you wouldn't want much more stringent laws around a riff that sounds a lot like Van Halen, right? Because now all of a sudden, everything you put out, you got to be nervous about for lawsuits. Of course, I'm not going to expect you to advocate for that, but the person who creates the music, we would expect them to advocate for it. So the way society works is we have all these different ravenous self-interests, and they've got to come together to find a fit. So I don't think tech should be expected to regulate tech. I think everyone in society should be expected to do what's in their self-interest, and it's in all of our self-interest to build laws that bound that self-interest and allow society to continue. So I don't see tech as the main player there.
Okay, so I'm really curious about a completely different topic. What do you think about the profusion of LLMs? I heard Mark Cuban on the Lex Fridman podcast say that there's going to be millions of models. Jan LeCun says we're each going to have our own model that's trained on ourselves, and it's going to fight off the bad AI.
Yeah.
It'll be like a spam filter or a personal protector. So right now, when do you think LLMs will reach the commodity phase? And so now we're waiting for GPT-5 and Claude 3 and Mistral, whatever. Every day now, Esther and I have been noticing that there's models coming out, multiple models every single day.
When are we going to get to commodified LLMs? I mean, on some level, ChatGPT was the first version of that, right? Simple chat interface, ask questions, summarize things, whatever. Now we've got a bunch of these tools where you can type in a couple prompts, you get a brand new country song with lyrics and the whole 9 yards. We've got a lot of commodification. I want to know what you're defining. So there's two very different visions. Cuban talking about every business under the sun will have cool different proprietary models versus LeCun's vision of sort of how does this affect personal day-to-day life. What track do you want to go down? Because I could go 6 hours on each of them.
I would like to hear both. And by commodification, I kind of meant, I see what you mean by ChatGPT being a commodity, but being a commodity like they're freely available on the market and they're cheap.
Again, I think at least my use, I'm not even paying for ChatGPT right now myself, but probably could for some workflows. I'm sure my editor is. But that's pretty cheap to me. But if we talk about in the business side of things, most businesses, at least at present, won't really have anywhere near the corpus or volume of data to train any model that's proprietarily good at anything. If I run 3 car dealerships, what kind of special data do I have? It's going to be a handful of businesses that have enough access to AI talent. There's still going to be some of that. This stuff is not going to be off the shelf like for eternity. You're not going to be able to do everything under the sun. You can't snap your fingers and have your data be harmonized and fed into a system. And that's not how this works. So there's only certain companies that have the data science talent, that have the proprietary data and volumes to be able to even train these initial models. It'll start up market. It'll trickle its way to the mid market at some point. Same way as AI in its first wave did 8 years ago. So I think it's viable that each individual business would have individual trained models. So anytime I have a customer support question and I work at Johnson & Johnson in some consumer department, there's some way to kind of answer everything under the sun there in a really reliable way that is anchored to a skeleton of truth. So it's unlikely to hallucinate wild different prices or product information. So different companies will have different models. They'll have different ways of managing ontologies and knowledge to draw from those models. And a company like J&J or a company like US Bank will be able to sort of leverage this stuff at some point. That requires a lot of data infra, a lot of talent, and a lot of maturity around what Gen AI in the enterprise even looks like, which we don't know right now, than we have today. So that is so far from a tomorrow vision that it's not even funny. And as I mentioned, we need both of those pressures from high-speed peers and from the bottom up in order to even get people to start thinking strategically and disruptively. So I don't think Mark Cuban's idea is wrong by any means, but I'm just saying in legacy enterprise, it's not tomorrow. I think it could be where things go and it'll start up market, but it's not tomorrow. In terms of day-to-day use for LLMs and sort of Gen AI, it's a very open-ended world right now as to sort of where our daily interactions will be with this tech. I do suspect absolutely, fully and completely that most of us will have some kind of agent that we're able to interact with all the time. So if I'm at work, I'm going to delegate emails. I'm going to, ask for certain files to be stored somewhere, whatever menial tasks, whatever complex tasks, whatever research tasks. Hey, figure out who all the players are in XYZ, sort them based on revenue, figure out who has a CMO with this much experience in these areas, give me the spreadsheet, cook up an email that's going to hit them about this. AI will run off and go do it in 25 seconds. There's going to be a kind of constant text and verbal interface in sort of the work and probably the personal life around those things. Exactly what that looks like, we don't know. Will it be one of the big players, like let's say Microsoft, where you could use them for all the work stuff and you use them for the personal stuff? Or do we land in a world where at work you're going to use the work one, and then at home you got one that handles booking a babysitter and all kinds of other stuff? I think there's a much broader proliferation here and a bigger conversation around what this does to relationships. So I think that already we're going to see some people kind of scraped away from the dating market, sort of talking to machines. I think we're going to have people that are starting to receive really great emotional support and great practical advice from AI systems that don't have their own self-interest. They're not going to hit on your girlfriend or ask you to help them move their couch over the weekend. They're just going to give you advice. They're just going to make you feel good. I think the constant interactions with these machines will be a wildly divergent change in the human experience. But what's the panoply? Is personal separate from work? Are they one big provider that provides them all? We don't know that vision yet. But I think relationships are going to get hit very hard.
Thanks for that. That's a whole nother podcast episode for us.
Sure is.
So what role do you think open source will play into all of this? We're already seeing the more popularity of open source. We have Mistral, we have Meta Llama, and all of that. How does open source play into all of
Again, broad question. Play into regulation, play into adoption, play into enterprise adoption. I'm just going to take this where I want to take it. But the question is wildly open-ended to the point of me almost not understanding it. Open source will be the approach of whoever thinks open source will best behoove their interests. There's a play right now of, hey, innovation shouldn't be regulated, kind of like the accelerationist kind of camp. Innovation shouldn't be regulated. Like, it's for the people, man, right? Rallying under the banner of the people is a long-trodden strategy for competing against the big dogs. And so if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but if you remember, OpenAI started this way, if you recall. And so Mistral started this way, if you recall. And now we can expect Mistral will be captured by Microsoft. It is just a play. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not calling it morally wrong or right. I'm calling it amoral. Everything I'm speaking about is amoral. But it is a pathway for influence, power, succeeding that if it feels like the right play will be the play people take. But they will drop that play as soon as it's not the right play, right? If you're Robespierre, what you want to do is you want to talk about virtue and being with the people and taking down this evil king. But then as soon as you get close to the throne, you want to start chopping heads off. It's a passing phase of sort of what you would go through to pursue self-interest. Open source is one of many ways to pursue self-interest. I think it's a necessary part of the ecosystem, but I don't see it as anything more than that. Any players that are out there doing it, I think let's look at it as a path to wealth and power that will be taken on and put off like an outfit as it serves the interests of the people who are steering these organizations.
I find it really interesting as you're speaking, Dan, that you kind of see, I don't want to say black and white, but you see it from like a business versus non-business perspective. Do you think that all of these questions regarding AI ethics and responsible AI, will it better serve people if we just all see it as black and white? This is just for business purposes versus, or this is for societal purposes?
I don't think black and white is necessarily the way that I see things. I see that everything's is wildly gray. So I don't think innovators are bad or good. I don't think regulators are bad or good. I think we've got a bunch of wacky, self-interested individual people in organizations, and we're all trying to kind of make things happen. So I don't have a good guy or a bad guy camp. I don't think black or white at all in that regard. In terms of business versus non-business AI applications, I don't think those lines will be very black and white either. I think I'll be using the same thing to schedule my meeting for a kid's soccer game as I will to schedule a meeting for, an important sales call. I don't think those lines will be there either. What I think is important for this stuff bumbling its way forward into society is that we have all of the self-interests at the table sort of chipping in their vantage point and perspective.
Pivoting to a big part of your outlook on your bio page, creating post-human intelligence is going to be one of the most consequential events ever, or outcomes, and we should aim to ensure that this creation is a worthy successor. What do you mean by that? And also, I heard Sam Altman say that AGI is not going to be artificial general intelligence for the listeners, is not going to be an event, but a process.
I don't quite understand the idea of listening to people literally. It doesn't make sense. The lens to listen through is, what would it make sense to say if you were in the shoes of this person? Not because Altman is bad, but because, like you and I, Altman has interests, right? If Altman did believe in a hard takeoff, and by the way, before the OpenAI founding, go look at the kinds of things Altman was saying about sort of the dissolution of man eventually by artificial intelligence. He could speak that way when he wasn't running an AGI company. I don't want to sort of have you, or I don't know, anybody listening, necessarily sort of take the things stated by powerful people as anything other than a perception management process for what their interests are. Again, I don't consider Altman a bad guy. I think all things considered, seems like a pretty good guy. But I don't know how seriously we should take that. So his opinions beforehand were quite different.
But does that mean to say that you disagree with that AGI won't be an event, but a process?
Here's what I'm saying. Let's say you had children and you regretted it. You would not say that to me on this podcast. If I asked you to your face if you regretted it, you wouldn't say it, would you? No. And so if Altman did genuinely believe that there was to be a hard takeoff that was quite likely to eviscerate us, but have his intellectual seed populate the galaxy, would he say it?
No.
No. And so we should take all of this as an intellectual exercise in perception and not an exchange of truth. And so you can listen to Altman's earlier ideas before starting OpenAI. Don't just listen to things. So everything is an exercise in perception management. I believe it will be a process of sorts, but I believe it will be remarkably fast. But what was your other question outside of
just to describe your general concept of worthy successor 101?
Sure. So I'll give you the high level. The basic idea is as follows. I am glad, now you may not be, I am glad that you and I bubbled up from sea snails into rodentia, into early hominids, into what we are now. Because if we were sea snails, I wouldn't be able to have a fun conversation with you, Sean, or with Esther for that matter. We'd just be bumbling around as sea snails. So I'm very glad that we bubbled up from that. The complexity and richness of our sentience, the complexity and richness of our capability has permitted us this much wider range of goals and wonderful things that we can do. I happen to be glad we bubbled up from sea snails. Some people maybe aren't. I happen to be glad. The suspicion here is that if much more value has bubbled up from sea snails, then there is much more value to also be bubbled up. There are goals, ideas, understanding of nature, sentient experiences, wholly outside of the reach for all eternity from the skulls of hominids, that is rich, worthy, and should be blossomed into, just as you and I, Sean, over many billions of years, have blossomed up from eukaryotes. And so that is one idea, sort of the sort of continuance of the blooming of the good, of sentience, of intelligence, of potentia itself. If we believe it was a net good to get to us, probably it is a net good long term that it continueth. That's a debatable point, but I happen to believe that. A second point that I think is not debatable is that we ought to keep the torch of life alive. One thing that would be a shame, Sean, is if a supervolcano or an asteroid or a solar flare or an extraterrestrial at some point, 100 years from now, were to arrive on Earth and we're just hominids as we are now. Pretty easy to eviscerate hominids as they are now, to be honest. So the torch of life got lit on Earth. We had a couple really big hits. Fortunately, none of us took all life out, right? Didn't totally wipe out the whole ball game. But we came pretty close. We had the whole dinosaur thing, and we've had big volcanoes and whatnot. We've had ice ages and all that. If we would hope, let's say 100, 1,000, 10,000 years from now, the light of life is still on, we should hope that it is more robust to those either alien outside forces or natural outside forces that would eventually eviscerate sort of humans. So keeping the torch of life alive would mean a post-human intelligence that could go populate galaxies, that could maybe escape into other dimensions, that could visit vastly different portions of space that we don't currently understand, just like monkeys don't understand what space is today. There's much more that we don't understand. And it would be a real shame if an individual event were to extinguish the life itself that started on Earth. So those are the 2 points to kind of advocate for this idea of a worthy successor.
So one thing that we both noted, you've already started talking about this, is your interest in AGI. Can you speak a little bit about the difference between AGI and AI?
There's some very smart people that kind of coined this term, like Peter Voss and Ben Goertzel, and there's many eminent thinkers here who lucky to know, and I would kind of credit them with sort of coming up with this term AGI. But the basic idea of AGI, and I think Altman himself has even made kind of statements about what he thinks sort of it is. AGI is sort of artificial intelligence that can essentially do anything people could do. So it's a little bit of a loosey-goosey term, but I think it's actually quite useful. If you think about all the things that humans can do right now that machines can't, AGI would just be the thing that tackles all those things that right now machines can't do. So at AGI, if it had a robotic instantiation, and by the way, I don't think it has to, so I think there will be AGI that doesn't necessarily live in a robot, but let's just say it did. It has a robotic instantiation somewhere. If you were to tell it to make a sandwich or become a brain surgeon or solve some important economics challenge or determine a new roadway path through the middle of Atlanta because there's going to be some big construction event, whatever the case may be, it would be able to sort of ubiquitously solve those problems around as well as a human. Now, of course, given that it's an AI system, presumably it would be much, much better than a human very quickly. And already there's many, many things that AI is much, much better than we are. But AGI is kind of this rough idea of an all-purpose intelligence which could bumble about and live and do in just as general a way that we do, but presumably astronomically more powerful and capable.
Okay, so who are the main players in actually achieving AGI? I mean, I think you need a massive developer talent, not just one genius in a lab. Who are the main players, and what's the practical purpose of AGI apart from interplanetary or a lot of people talk about that, or just the moral dimensions of it. But what are the practical applications?
I think the practical gets pretty wacky, to be honest. The major players are sort of the known folks on the field. So you have your OpenAI, you have your Anthropic, you have your DeepMind. Facebook has FAIR, FAIR. Maybe you got another handful, right? Mistral, maybe, but is Mistral captured by Microsoft now? Who really knows? For the most part, it's these known sort of large language model players. My guess is China has some stuff under the hood that we don't know about. I heavily suspect it's not as developed as what it is in the West. I think China has fallen behind in this last Gen AI wave in terms of relative tech adoption, relative proliferation of new research and capability. So it is very much the known players. To your point, I don't think there's any genius in their mother's bedroom or basement who's cooking up the next thing that's going to become the AGI deity of some sort. So that's that. What are the practical applications? If you talk to people building them, the practical applications would be, well, jeepers. If we had an AGI, it could cure cancer because it would understand cells, and it could do research at scale and simulate physics and simulate biology and cure all of our diseases. Maybe it could also do all the work. So human beings could kind of have just a really nice extended vacation. It could kind of do the work and provide the resources, and humans would really be freed up from sort of this state of nature that we've been shackled to sort of since our evolutionary development. Anything else under the sun, mining asteroids and pulling gold from some asteroid somewhere, literally AGI, the quote unquote practicals start to get into just wild imagination. It could do everything. It could give us all a vacation to the moon if we want to do it. Artificial general intelligence is sort of purported to be almost like the final invention, if you will. But I think there's a lot of very logical concern around what does it mean when there's something vastly more capable than human beings living on the planet. And there are many very eminent thinkers, including Jeff Hinton and Yoshua Bengio and the people that have really pushed this science forward, who would really say that sort of as a natural consequence, we would expect the attenuation of people, sort of in maybe a 20-year time horizon. We would sort of shuffled off the board, probably not by AGI being malicious, but by it pursuing its goals. When you or I build a hospital or a highway, we have no malice to the roly-poly bugs that live in the dirt. But the fate of the roly-poly bugs is in our hands. We don't maliciously pave over them, but we pave nonetheless. And so it is purported by many of the sort of more prominent researchers in this space, LeCun being a very large exception, Andrew Ng being an exception, Hinton and Bengio very much in this camp, that Stuart Russell as well, that there's a very strong risk of it sort of doing its own thing and that not necessarily involving us and pretty naturally fading us off in the next couple decades. So.
And on that note, I wanted to know what your response is to the AI doomers who fear that AI will take over the world.
I have a very nuanced take here. Again, no black or white for me, I'll tell you that. So I believe that most of the suppositions of the doomers are, in my opinion, rather challenging to argue with. Bengio and Hinton would agree, Stuart Russell would agree, some people would disagree. But some of their suppositions are that a generally intelligent system would probably aim to expand its resources and behoove its own interests and develop goals of its own. And that if it could do that as rapidly as these kind of computer systems can, we would expect that the relative value of humanity in some sort of moral sense couldn't just be hard-coded to keep the hominids happy forever. There's a lot of supposition that that's probably not a viable thing to do with a drastically post-human intelligence that is 1,000 times more capable than we are in all possible regards. So I think the doomers are essentially right. It is most likely, in my opinion, that should we have AGI, it won't follow too long from there that humanity would be attenuated. So we would fade out. I think the bigger question is, how do we fade out? Is it friendly? Is it bad? I don't think we'll have much control, by the way, but I think maybe we could try to make sure that we've got a nice way of bowing out. Maybe we could be uploaded into some blissful sugar cube of computronium before we're turned off. I also think, and the doomers maybe don't think this, some of them don't, some of them do, that there is a bigger question of if AI does take over, is that good or bad? I'm not saying I advocate for the end of humanity now. I'm not rooting for that. I'm not rooting for blasting AGI off tomorrow. But I think we should ask, is it a generally capable enough system to populate the galaxy to pursue goals vastly beyond humanity? Or is it just sort of a LLM kludge on steroids that can do enough damage and build enough wacky stuff to kind of end humanity, but actually never blossom into anything more? Would it stop the blossoming? Is it actually something that will continue to blossom? So to the doomers, I agree that basically AGI would spell the end of us. But I would also say, what traits would make it a worthy successor if it did? And that maybe we should chit-chat about that a little bit in the policy space.
All right, two questions kind of follow up. I'm going to bring up Yann LeCun again, by the way, because
let's do it. Yeah, no, I have a lot of.
But why could not AGI and humans coexist? AGI could be so smart, so benign that it would say, "Hey, there's a role for both." A symbiotic evolution. The other thing is, you've written that a worthy successor would operate in the material world, right? Possibly with nanotechnologies, brain-computer interface, other tools. Yann LeCun argues, though, that AI cannot, and Gen AI has no grounding in the material world whatsoever, and that, in fact, it's perhaps dumber than a human baby. It can't make plans. It can't operate other than with computer vision, very circumscribed applications.
Yep.
It can't do things. It can't walk around. The robots are incredibly clumsy right now and promise to be for 100, 200 years. How would the worthy successor be able to operate in the material world?
So a couple points here. The most powerful companies in the Fortune 500 are predicated on artificial intelligence. This is not babies. If all of those companies just had the collective intelligence of an infant, clearly they wouldn't be the most powerful companies on the literal face of the literal earth. I think the analogy can stick in some weird abstract way, but it's quite clear that these things are more capable than infants are in very practical ways all around the world every single day. In the general intelligence sense, maybe I get what he's getting at, but I don't like the analogy as a blanket statement. And there's certainly some of his peers don't agree with him in that regard. How will AI become instantiated physically? Already we're seeing this giant boom in biped robots. I think we will continue to see a boom in warehouse robots. I think we'll continue to see a boom in manufacturing robots, continue to see a boom in the automation of life sciences and all kinds of other areas where machines are touching the world. Tactile sense, vision, auditory, et cetera, et cetera. And I think as we develop more and more of those instantiations, a machine that can walk around with 1 million human bodies, and it's going to be a while until we get to that level with biped robots. Let's just say it's 10,000. We have 10,000 biped robots do everything from digging ditches to loading boxes in a warehouse to planting in a garden to cooking a gourmet meal. At some point, that trained data can be baked into similar AI systems and essentially do all of that stuff. And I don't think we're decades and decades and decades away from enough of these big models to be connected to physically instantiated systems to be able to then have that grounding and connection to the quote-unquote real world. I think today we don't have that. So I'm not afraid that tomorrow morning some AGI will fall from the sky and take over. I'm not afraid of that at all. But I think the momentum that we're on is the continued embodiment, continued development of its brain, if you will. And I think it's reasonable to suspect that we're actually not very far away from it being much more physically grounded than maybe all of humanity collectively through its various sensors, means, and physical forms. So I think that's how we would get there. But you also did ask about why couldn't we coexist? Big picture here, there's a happy and delightful vision of sort of an AI eternally shackled and chained to the values of hominids. So we could program this thing eternally to sort of coddle and take care of a species 1,000 times less intelligent than itself. We have two sides of this coin. One is the practical concerns. As you have an AI that expands and fooms astronomically in its capabilities, its ability to value, its ability to make decisions, will we expect that for years and years of doubling, tripling, 10xing every single year, that the one value that would remain the same throughout that entire fooming process would be that the hominid should be made happy? I don't think that that's reasonable to suspect, and there are many much more eminent folks in the computer science space than myself who would very much concur that sort of eternal alignment of an astronomically more powerful system is probably not viable. Jeff Hinton's got something to say about this. In addition, though, there is a moral question here. I am grateful, and I mean eternally grateful, that my life is not some grand service to an arbitrary species of sea snail that I make happy and I build an environment for, and that day to day, sort of all of my actions serve it. I am very grateful that that is not my life. And I think there is something to be said of if we create something vastly more intelligent and conscious than us, ought it not do what it will? I don't think, Sean, you're putting up a picket when somebody's paving over the roly-poly bugs to build a hospital or build a highway. Probably you're cool with it, Sean. I'm not going to lie. Probably you're cool with it. Because we humans have better things to do, don't we, Sean? And I suspect, actually, that AI will also have better things to do. And there is a moral question about whether we should bound that. So I think there's an impossibility question, and there is a somewhat unfortunate and uncouth handing of the baton question given a long enough time horizon as well.
Okay, but I would just raise this one thing to that viewpoint. Human civilization is predicated on the ultimate value of human life. Wouldn't we program that into AGI as well, that the ultimate goal and most valuable thing in the universe is human life?
I guess, Sean, I mean, how long has that been the basis of human society? How cheap has life been since our very beginnings up until right about now? This idea that sort of the current post-World War II, this UN piece of paper, which I love, by the way, a declaration of kind of human rights deal there. Great stuff. The idea that that floats in the ether and is eternal or unchanging is absolutely preposterous. I mean, there's many, many people alive who lived in times where life was much, much more cheap. So is it great that we've gotten to where we are? Sure, Sean. Sure, I would agree. But I don't hold this notion that idea that you've just articulated exists in the air and is something that eternally is believed by all men and all women. I think there are places you can go right now, Haiti maybe, we could talk about places, where maybe you wouldn't see that as kind of the modus operandi. And I think that stuff is just upheld by law. So as it turns out, Sean, it is a bunch of hominids who came together and had enough conflict to kind of do this coordination thing, and only some of them are coordinating, to kind of come up with this idea of, okay, maybe if we think about it this way, we won't fight as much. That's what we've arrived at, Sean. We haven't arrived at some eternal truth that will forever be upheld by all future intelligences. We should expect, Sean, the same thing to happen moving forward. Higher intelligences competing and cooperating in new ways, thinking about new rules they need to play by. We ought not expect an eternal, frozen, ossified version of hominid values for eternity. This is my supposition.
Okay, I see. I hear that.
Okay, Dan, so to wrap up, you wrote an article about AGI and the term worthy successor. Do you think artificial general intelligence is a worthy successor?
I am so not convinced it's a worthy successor. It is ridiculously not funny. So if you read the article, it is about the very firm supposition that if we hammer on steroids whatever smells like strong AI today, we are rather unlikely to arrive at a worthy successor. This is my firm and well-stated, well-known belief. So I am absolutely not in that camp, just to be clear. I think it will require a tremendous amount of both innovation and coordination in order to bubble up this intelligence from a non-arms race dynamic to have the hope of something that might treat us well and might populate the galaxy. So the inevitability of a worthy successor is not my perspective.
Aha, okay. Dan, thank you for being with us. I mean, this was one of the most stimulating podcasts we've done yet. We've not gotten to these philosophical issues as much. We've been doing a lot of other, enterprise-oriented stuff. So really psyched to get into the meat of this philosophical dialogue that's going on out there. So thank you so much for being with us. And we'll be following you on your podcast.
For sure.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Please remember to share on your favorite social media platform and leave a review. For more on today's topic, please check out the TechTarget News website.